Well, welcome to the Followup podcast. My name is Hayden. I am the worship director here at Arbor Church, and today I'm joined by Bryan, our students director, and Cliff Tadema, our interim pastor and speaker on Sunday. So, if you weren't here, and if you didn't check Facebook, Instagram, or our website, you probably are unaware that we started a new series, and that series is Changes, and I will ask that people on stage don't sing the song so we don't get copyright claimed, because that's all we've been doing in the office. But we started this series after Forgiveness, which was our Easter series, and very fitting that our first week of Changes, we announced a very big change for Arbor that's coming. But Cliff, I want to ask, because you were, this was very much a series that you wanted to do. You brought it to us. We loved it. What inspired the idea behind this series, Changes?
I think two things. One, that Arbor is going through a lot of changes and has been. And as I was thinking about that and then beginning to think of the different biblical stories of characters in the Bible who experienced great change, and the thought of let's look at them, the change that they experienced, and then apply it to our lives for principles as to how we can live out our faith more effectively. That's kind of where it came from.
Yeah. And this is kind of, we talk about the different sermons that we end up preaching on a Sunday at a Christian church. We talk about exegetical, like expository, going through a book of the Bible. We talk about topical. This is kind of in that middle category where it's a little bit topical, a little bit expository, because you're going through, you very much went from verse 1 to verse 44, right?
That's correct.
Matthew or John 11? John 11. Which is cool. Like, we often call these, we propose these character study series, and this is very much what that is, right? We're taking a character, we're going to study them, but we're not focusing on the whole life of some of these characters, just where the change happened. When you started thinking about this idea, I imagine you probably had maybe one, two, maybe a handful of characters that you were like, got to do these ones. Was that the case?
Yeah, I think, well, at least for a couple, two or three.
Yeah.
And Lazarus is one that I thought right away, what a change to have been dead and then come back to life again.
Yep.
That's probably the biggest change that I can think of. And so let's look at that one. And for me, even having taught on Lazarus before, but looking at it differently to say, okay, this change in his life and what led up to it and what can we learn from it for ourselves. That was kind of a fun thing to do, look at it differently that way.
Yeah, we had, I think it was either right before I got to Arbor or when I first got to Arbor, we had a similar series called Name Changers. Do you remember that, Bryan? Do you remember a few of, I know, like, obviously Saul to Paul was one of them. Do you remember any of the other characters?
I think Simon to Peter was one of them.
I would guess Abram to Abraham.
I can't remember.
Was that one or not?
I think it might have been one, but I also think we might have done like an Abraham series recently from it, so I don't know if we touched it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there a woman too?
Sarah.
Oh, I think that
Sarai
might have been one.
Okay. Yeah. So that being said, Cliff, feel free to jump into spoilers. Are any of those people going to make a guest appearance in the Changes series?
Yes, they sure are.
Okay. Don't tell us which ones, because we want to be surprised, but I was just curious.
Yep.
Was this, I imagine the idea came up with those few people that you thought of, and then was it kind of eye-opening to see how many people had changes happen in their life when they experienced God? Was it just like, man, this list is actually too long, probably need to trim it up a little bit and just pick the big ones?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. Throughout the Bible, right, the change is a very common theme. So it would have been, it's a list that you definitely have to narrow down.
Yeah.
And then to look at those characters from that perspective and saying, what can we really learn from it? That's been kind of a fun exercise that I think is, I'm hoping will be really beneficial for those listening as well, because you're not just hearing the story, and some of the stories you hear, the story you'll hear for Mother's Day and the week after, I think people who've read their Bibles will remember the stories very well.
Yeah.
But I think they also might get a new take on some of that as it applies to them.
Yeah. I will say when I read when I saw the title of your manuscript and I heard earlier in the week that you were going to do Lazarus, I kind of mentally checked out for a little bit because I was like, okay, that's an easy one. Like he was dead, now he's alive. But what I thought was really cool about your message is it wasn't as big of a focus on Lazarus, but his sisters and the people around the story that really went through the changes, which I thought was a cool way to kind of bury the lead of like, we're going to talk about Lazarus. But really the biggest change came from the hearts and the spirits of the people around him and not necessarily the physical dead to alive.
Well, what was really cool too is you even filled out the sermon I gave, which was circles. When we did circles,
Oh, right.
I hit on that story, but it was on the like painting it from backwards of the people in Bethany, how
Yes.
the moment. So I touched a little bit on the resurrection of Lazarus, but I was mainly focused on the Jewish believers or the Jewish people came to comfort Martha and Mary when their brother died.
Mhm.
Right.
But then when they experienced when they witnessed the resurrection of Lazarus, they became believers. So it's cool to even like have you come back a few weeks later and then fill out
Tie
the
that.
gaps that I couldn't preach because I wasn't really focusing too much on
that issue.
on that.
Yeah.
I was more focused on what we as a people can do if in our second circle. So
Right.
or first circle
First circle,
Yeah.
yeah.
is what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was cool to even like for me who taught a little bit of it, and hopefully are people who remember
Right.
what I taught
Right.
a few weeks ago.
Right.
For you to then come in and fill the gaps with it.
Yeah.
That's what we always hope, right? We always hope that everyone attends every single week so they get to see some of these fun narrative threads being pulled.
Yeah.
But there's probably 10 people that saw that and they're like, oh, that's cool. I remember Brian's week, Cliff's week, that played really well.
And I read that.
Yeah.
So we have a joke on staff because we like to spend time planning these series out, and then we like to have a little tagline, right? And then we have also a through line, which is so funny because I feel like we spend so much time on these things, but like nobody really knows. Like no one could repeat what the what the tagline of circles was or what the through line of circles was. But you kind of started out right at the top telling us what the through line of this series will be. And you said biblical stories of change that give us principles for a life of faith. So what I think is so interesting, Cliff, is that you put the title of this message as Lazarus, and then you did that through line, and your main point for the sermon was trusting God changes us. Does that apply to Lazarus or the people around him?
Yes.
Gosh darn it.
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. We never we don't hear enough from Lazarus, but we know it did because we know later that the Jewish rulers wanted to kill him along with Jesus. So it obviously impacted his witness and the fact that he was such evidence of who Christ was and could speak to that. But I think for me, and you just kind of threw out there that trusting God changes us was kind of the theme that wove through it. But that didn't come to me until, and actually I was talking with Allison about it, and I was a little frustrated because I said, I feel like I'm missing something here. And I don't know what it is for sure. And as we were talking through it, she reminded me of the tag and said, how does that play in the change itself? And that's when all of a sudden then it started to come to me. And the idea of every one of these people, from Martha, Mary, I'm presuming the messenger, the Jewish people who saw, the ones who participated in rolling the stone away, the ones who participated in unwrapping him, for all of them, it was a trusting God issue that would change them. And then it just made me realize, if we're trusting God, if we really are doing that on a day-by-day basis, it will change us. It has to.
Yeah. And I think what's cool about, I mean, I guarantee many pastors have probably said this before, but with Lazarus, you get the very physical, tangible life change, and then everyone around him, you get the spiritual life change, right?
Right.
He's literally raising from the dead physically, but what Jesus is trying to accomplish there is, I'm going to raise your spirit in the future, right? And I'm going to create a new creation.
I do have a question on that we can't answer, and I love asking questions like this.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you think that Lazarus' life like changed after this? Like I think he believed that Jesus was the Messiah before this moment, but like after being actually resurrected, raised from the dead, what do you think Lazarus' life was like afterwards? Do you think it just stayed the same, or
No.
did he become more of an evangelist afterwards? I know we'll never know, but
do we know do we know much about Lazarus before his death?
No.
I was going to say, so we don't even know if he was like this. We assume since he was friends with Jesus, he had to have...
This might be the first time biblically we even heard of Lazarus, because we first know Martha and Mary from the Martha serving and Mary at the feet of Jesus.
Right.
But I think the next time we encounter them is Lazarus' death.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I know we see after this moment Lazarus reclining with Jesus. Yeah. When they invite Jesus back in, I think the night before.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And we just have to guess at what it was beforehand, because, obviously we see the spiritual life changes for the people around the story, but we don't actually get to know if, was Lazarus a bad guy before he died? We assume not, because he had a relationship with Jesus and maybe there was some history between them before that. But it is a good question to kind of bring up.
Great question. And then another one that I always thought of after reading Lazarus it's actually a two-part, is later when he did die, like what was he thinking? Like I wonder what was his cause of death, and was he thinking, hey, maybe it might happen again? Or in the end of John when oh my gosh, Peter, who is the one who denied Jesus, right? Yeah, Peter. Yes, when Jesus was saying, "Feed my sheep, tend my sheep," and then Peter was like, "Okay, what about that guy?" And Jesus like, "What about that guy? If it's my plan that he lives forever, what is it to you?" I'm always like, what if that one was Lazarus? Even though we believe it's one of the 12, but I'm like, what if Lazarus never died because he already did it?
Right. Except that we know he did, right? Because he's not around, or he'd still be around today. So he died. And I think the answer to those questions is unequivocally he changed. And we do have other records of people who have died and come back to life. And the one thing that seems to be consistent with all of them is they lose their fear of death, ironically, because they've been there and done that, I guess. But you know what I mean? And I think that's the way Lazarus lived. If you go on and read after that, I think it's chapter 12, it might be 13, but in there where the Jewish leaders are talking about him, it's very apparent that he has become a force himself.
Because it said they want to
to kill him along with Jesus and Lazarus.
Of the account of him.
Yes. So people were apparently coming just to see him as well, going, I got to check this guy out who had this experience and wanting to hear from him. I'm disappointed that John didn't feel it important enough to say, and by the way, here is Lazarus's review of what took place. Right? That'd have been great. Just a chapter on that would have been a lot of fun.
It would have been great because there's so many questions, but hey, let's keep it to Jesus, I guess.
Yeah.
So, Cliff, I will say you set yourself up for quite the task on Sunday by going verse by verse for 45 verses. That is quite a bit. But I wanted to ask you about one of your first points that you made after the main point, which was God's plan is always for His glory and our good, which I think you read it face value. Yeah, that sounds great. But the tough part is with a lot of our stories, it's sometimes hard to recognize the second part, right?
Yes.
And what's so interesting is in this story, you get to see probably the thing that shakes most humans to their core, and that's a death in the family, right? And reading through that, I know obviously we can jump ahead in the story and pull out our good. How are we supposed to feel, I guess, that point being real in our lives when the resurrection hasn't happened, right?
Right. I think it comes down to perspective.
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying this. So either he's saying it and he's telling us the truth, or we're calling him a liar, right? I mean, it comes down to that because the words are so clear. The sickness won't end in death, but it's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it.
Yep.
So Jesus is saying he's going to be glorified if we entrust Jesus with anything. He's going to get glory for it, and it's going to be for our good.
Yep.
But we might not see that right away. We might not even see that in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Because what Jesus keeps coming back to is he keeps this entire story, he keeps pulling it back to an eternal viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And the people in it keep trying to bring it back to a temporal viewpoint. And and even the theology talks about he will rise again. And Martha was smart enough to go, oh, yeah, he's talking about the last days. Yeah, I know he's going to do it in the last days, but, but that's what Jesus keeps doing, right? He sees death as sleeping, and I made that point, and he sees living without God as death.
Yeah.
And that's a different perspective.
Very different.
And so to see that, I think sometimes it does require being able to pull back and say, Lord, could you show me this so I can see it better, because I believe it, because it's your words. It does not feel like that in my life right now. And I've been there where I've looked at it and gone, how could that be for God's glory or my good? I can't see either one of them in that. And then I think we have to be patient and ask for his perspective instead of our own.
Yeah. I think one of the other points that I really appreciated from your sermon was after you read verses 13 and 14, and some context there is, Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And your point was sometimes we just need Jesus to speak plainly or we'll miss it. And you had a pretty cool illustration with your wife, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah. When we were talking about this story, we'll at times have a chance to just be able to, I'll use her as a sounding board, and she loves that because then she can get into it as well. In fact, she was one who suggested Lazarus when I first talked about this. Yeah. And but when we talked about that verse, she said, one of her favorite verses has always been, I can't remember the reference for it, Bryan will, but I'm sure you will, but is her sins, which were many, are forgiven, right? That context that Jesus is talking about the woman who all of her sins have been forgiven, so she's going to love much, right? That's always been my wife's favorite verse. But when we were going through this, she said, I think this may become my new life verse because I so often need Jesus just to say it plainly to me.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I thought that's really true.
I mean, honestly, I speak in metaphors, as you guys know. Like anytime I'm trying to prove a point, I bring a metaphor. But I definitely am the disciples and the parables. Is like, okay, dude, what does this mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Just lay it out there, man.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But the point that I want to talk about that we probably can go the remainder of the time.
Okay.
Is your point of that Jesus wants us to have our hands on the miracles is Bryan's translation of your point. Could you actually say the point that you said? Because of
participating in the miraculous.
The miraculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that point. I love that point because it's such a blessing for us to be part of it. Because you brought up that he said, remove the stone or remove the rock, which Jesus easily could have done. I mean, he did it in his own resurrection, or had angels come and open it for him, but allowing people to be blessed that you get to be part of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I know me, a little prideful, but if I was that person, it's like, did you hear that Lazarus was resurrected? I'd be like, yeah, but I opened the stone. I opened it.
Yeah. Or
I had my hand on it.
Yeah. And the cool thing to me is that then when Lazarus is raised from the dead, he does it again. Unwrap him and let him go.
Yeah. And
gets them engaged in it. He doesn't say, hey, I'll take care of this part. I'll do the unwrapping.
Yeah.
Which would have made sense. Or I'm seeing some of those people going, I ain't touching him, man.
Yeah.
I'm not, this is too weird for me. And then he tells them, no, address your fears, unwrap him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one's so cool to me because it says how God wants us engaged, not just in participating in the miracles, but also with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And helping each other let go.
Yes.
Yeah, it reminds me of there's opportunities in our life many times where we feel like the Holy Spirit urging us to help somebody who's homeless or somebody who needs quite a bit of help. And I've had somebody ask me one time when I was like early in my church leadership, like what happened? Like, what if I don't listen? What does that mean? And I was like, what I believe it means is God offered you to be part of something amazing in that person's life, and you rejected it.
Yeah.
I do believe that person was still helped by God by somebody else who came by, who actually was obedient. It's like you just missed out on being part of that blessing.
Right.
And so when I read that, I was like, man, like, again, Jesus could have done both of those. But
Right.
he's like, hey, would you like to be
Right.
part of this?
Well, I think that what's also interesting, and this isn't to detract from the spiritual principle, but when you go to a magic show, right, or even a magician, a lot of times they get the crowd to participate because it eliminates the factor of there's no smoke and mirrors, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm the one doing all the hand and pulling stuff out, you're like, okay, but so he did something in there and we don't know what was going on, right? But to have them involved in the process too of like, okay, like you guys are seeing this. I didn't do anything funky here. This is legit. This is a legit miracle, right? And they can have like, very much they can witness that story and propel it and say, no, I was the one that moved the stone. Like he was standing 5 feet back. Like it was all him. Like he couldn't have got in there and slipped a body double or anything like that, you know? There was no trap door in the tomb. I saw the whole thing.
Lazarus was a twin. It was just his twin.
Right.
So to me, like that's the cool part too, is it also like it eliminates any sort of thought process of like, well, did he do something or did Lazarus actually have a twin? Blah blah blah. So
Right.
But just in our own lives, that Jesus invites us to be part of his miracles.
Yeah, and it goes. To me, it's both sides of that, right? He's inviting them to unwrap him, to remove the stone, but he does this amazing, miraculous work inside of Lazarus that is not completed until Lazarus has to allow them to unwrap him.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up because you said it subtly at the end of your message, but it was impactful for me where you're telling people if someone is trying to heal you or help you, let them help, because I think we as humans are always, especially like I think us who are very close and hands-on in the church, that we are so thankful and glad to help other people, but we don't like to receive that help ourselves.
Right. Right.
And so
we hate for people to think we're needy.
Yeah. I told this Allison a few weeks ago, just talking about how the whole concept of washing feet, that I think every one of us on staff would be the first to wash the members of Arbor's feet. But if someone's like, all right, now let me do yours, like, oh, no, I'm good. You don't need to wash. You don't need to wash mine.
Right.
I would be the first to reject that. Like, no, man, like leave my feet alone. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Sometimes it's much harder to receive, right?
It is.
Yeah.
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 But you're that point of doing that because Lazarus is now resurrected. He could have been like, what's wrong? And like, rip it off. Don't touch me. And like, rip it off himself. Like he could have unwrapped himself. Maybe. I don't know how binded he was.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like I love, that point to me stuck out the most.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
He wants us to be part of the miraculous, and then us who maybe need to receive the miraculous from others to allow it.
Yep. I was also really hit by in that same sequence. Martha says, "Wait a minute. If you pull the stone back, it's going to stink."
Yeah.
And in my head, I picture that, Jesus had said, remove the stone, and the guys are just starting to push on it, and all of a sudden she's going, wait, and kind of turning like and going, he's going to stink by now. You open that up, you're opening up potentially a can of worms. And one of the things that I thought of as I was picturing that is how often we see the stuff in us that needs healing, or that is a sin, or that is a problem, or that is the decay, and we don't want people to see it. We want to keep it hidden. But once we let it be exposed and God does his work in it, it becomes, our biggest testimony. So it's so interesting to me how people, and I'll be an example of that. You know, I don't make any bones about the fact that I spent time in prison. Why? Because ultimately, to me, it's glory to God that he took that situation and turned it to his good and to mine, for his glory and my good. We're right back to that again, right? And I know women who were so embarrassed about the fact that they had gotten an abortion or that they had something else in their life or that they were addicted to something. They wouldn't want anybody to know about it until they do that thing where they finally allow it to become aired, to become open, and God heals it, and then it becomes the greatest part of their testimony. And I think that's so exciting that then they're and then guess what? Then they're not afraid to say anything about it either. They just trot it right out there, you know.
I mean, honestly, it talks about why confession is so important.
Yes,
but I do also like that same concept with Martha opening it. I also wonder if there's a sense of like she said it smells, that she also didn't want anybody to see her brother like that,
right?
Where like airing out sin, but also there's moments where we do that to people where we don't want to air their sins. Like
we think we know better.
We know better. We're protecting them. Like no. Like leave them alone. Don't talk to them. Leave them alone.
Yeah.
But that same concept, maybe there was even that sense of like she didn't want anybody to see her brother
right
in this smell. Like that's what they remember Lazarus as is decomposing smell.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of different layers, huh?
And I think what's so cool about this chunk of scripture is it's some of the few times that we get recorded acts of humanity by Jesus, right? You see Jesus wept, and I think a lot of times we glaze over it because it's one of the shortest, if not the shortest, verse in the Bible, right?
Yep.
But there's a lot of times, especially when you watch like movie or TV show depictions of Jesus, Jesus can look like this android who hasn't learned human emotions yet because he's a god. But I told Bryan, one of my favorite things about the first season of The Chosen was seeing Jesus having fun and partying at the wedding
sarcastic
feast. Yeah, like a little sarcastic, like, oh, that's a real person, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's so cool about that is like Jesus had, better than anyone, an eternal perspective, right? So he's like, if I was Jesus, why would I cry over Lazarus? If I knew, hey, this is all going to work out in the end. But I think we get to see a little bit of Jesus's humanity bleeding through, right? And we get to see it in the Garden of Gethsemane with the fear and anxiety. And I like to imagine him pacing back and forth when he's talking to God. But I just think it's so cool to get some of these verses because Jesus is this wise, sage teacher. But it's really cool to also see the human side of him. And I think it also is very attractional to us humans as well, because we get to hear so many stories of, woman, why are you crying? It's like, dude, have a heart, man.
Or calling a girl a dog.
Right. Hayden, I think you're really onto something there about his emotion, because he did know he was going to raise him from the dead. And yet he still wept.
Yes.
He still, it said it was deep, right, in him. And so what that tells me is he hurts because we hurt.
Yeah. Yep.
Even though he can see it from an eternal perspective and go, that will mean nothing to you later. He still hurts when we hurt. And there's something really comforting about that.
Well, and it's just
he wept over Jerusalem.
Right.
Right.
And it's such a parental thing, right? Because I don't have kids, but I imagine for you guys, you probably saw your kids crying over very meaningless, trivial things, and you guys aren't monsters, so you also had a human response to that of like, oh, even though Cade's crying about a wheel falling off of his toy truck, I'm a human and I have a response to that, right? Like I'm not just like, ugh.
Cade's hit many tables with his head that I wanted to punch the table for hurting my son.
Exactly, right? And I think that's what's so comforting about this account is not only do we get to see the miracle, but we get to see the miracle with a human element in there as well, right?
Well, and let's talk about this. Not only that, but the authority Jesus had.
Yeah.
Because if I went up to a cemetery right now and I'm like, unbury that grave, I was going to look at me like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, unbury. Like, get out of here, dude. I'm like, all right, sorry, man.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus.
Worth a shot.
Jesus had the authority. Like, everyone like listened and was there to like just who this man was, how everybody knew there was something different, that he had the authority to have people open up this grave, because I don't think all three of us that would not be able to happen.
Yeah.
Roll the stone away. Yeah, roll out of here.
Yeah. Probably think we're trying to steal something.
Well, when you mentioned cemetery, I'm like, we think of these big grass lawns, with tombstones.
Yeah.
And they're just like, that's a pretty good cliff. Let's put some
Let's put
cemeteries.
Is there a fox in there? I don't know.
It would look great on this cliffside. Bunch of tombs.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, we're definitely getting to the derail section of the podcast. Is there anything else we want to touch on before we close the podcast up?
Man, I just say, guys, keep listening and attending this series because it is. I think what's going to be my favorite part of this series is the human element that we get to keep addressing and the transformation that comes from our Messiah.
Yep. And I'm really excited about the story next week at Mother's Day, but the week after that as well, because we're going to actually have a chance to hear some testimony.
That's awesome.
That's going to be really cool. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Well,
God's doing great things at Arbor.
And there is one other thing, talking about rising from the dead and all that. Actually has nothing to do with that, but
I hit my ankle.
Oh my gosh.
But I did promise that I would give a shout out to our new pastor, Ryan Plans, who's going to be here.
Woo!
And
you took a phone call
in
from
July,
him right before we started.
And it almost slipped my mind. If he's listening to this, I hope he made it past the 30 minutes because I think we're just past that.
Yeah.
I hit my shin.
And he got the. I told him I'd give him a heads up. Okay, and
All right,
we'll take care of Bryan too. We'll make sure he's okay.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening or watching the Followup podcast, and we will see you guys next week.
Adios.